Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto left Konoha and traveled the world. 4 years after the war's end, Kakashi assigns Naruto a long mission with the promise of becoming the next Hokage at its completion. Naruto sets out on his mission that may take years and participates in many adventures along the way. During his travels, he unexpectedly encounters a beautiful, pink-eyed woman from his past. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 13, On a Strong Foundation. Mitsuo Kitagawa actually felt the air pressure around her lighten for a moment and then grow heavier a split second later. Naruto's fist retracted from beside her and the air moved with it. Mitsuo was astonished at the sheer speed and precision of Naruto's strikes. She was merely observing him currently in order to practice her form, but Naruto was highly capable of multitasking for her benefit. Naruto asked for her attention with a firm tilt of his head. "You see how I turn my wrist when I bring back my hand?" Mitsuo could only nod with her eyes bugging out to try to discern how exactly the blonde had done that. The two of them were standing in a wide meadow at the bottom of a small dip in between one of the many mountain passes that were scattered throughout Kaminari no Kuni. Kurachuchi was lying down on a blanket on the other side of the meadow, admiring the beautiful day. The sun was out and the colored leaves of the surrounding trees were gliding across her vision. It was probably one of the last perfect days of the year, and it would not be long until the harsh winter would come and bury the beauty she was currently enjoying. Kurachuchi lifted her head up from her position and stared at her two companions. It had been a few days since she and Naruto had added Mitsuo to their little group. After they had left the ruined village of the Kitagawa and the Igarashi clans, Naruto had sent a message to the Shimo daimyo that reported the grisly details of what had happened. There had been no reply back as of yet. As Kurachuchi saw Naruto show Mitsuo the proper positioning of his strikes, she thought about his love for the little girl. Naruto had instantly accepted Mitsuo as one of his precious people, and she had responded well to it. She would consistently stare at Naruto with starry eyes and ask a million questions about himself. Of course, Mitsuo had taken to Kurachuchi just as well. The two girls would usually bundle up together in a sleeping bag during the nights and help each other with the more feminine situations that Naruto was not privy to. Needless to say, the two shinobi had quickly fallen in love with the child. Earlier that day, Mitsuo had asked Naruto if he could train her. The young blonde had the biggest grin on his face when he agreed to her proposal. He had started their training by assessing Mitsuo's current skills. She had very little prior training in the shinobi arts, but there was a clear basis that was a good foundation to build off of. She could use her ice release to a certain degree if there was a water source nearby, but she was still inefficient with it. Naruto was not knowledgeable in the properties of ice release, but he did understand the basic components of its workings, especially the necessary wind release. He had decided they would work on chakra natures later down the road and settled on teaching her some taijutsu for the moment. "How do you move so fast, Naruni?" Mitsuo's innocent question bubbled in the cool autumn air. Naruto blinked and smiled affectionately at the charming nickname she used to address him. He did not think he was moving that fast. In fact, he was going incredibly slow so she could properly see his movements. He rubbed the back of his neck and tried to think of an appropriate answer. "It's just the results of heavy training, I guess. Believe me, I wasn't always this quick. You should have seen me when I was a kid, Mitsuo. My movements were so sluggish and sloppy that I could never land a hit." Mitsuo's eyes shined with excitement at the prospect of seeing a small, clueless Naruto. She was so overcome with elation that she moved her feet up and down sporadically. "Can you go faster, Naruni?" Naruto's grin was reminiscent of a fox when he thought of how to answer her. "You bet I can. Wanna see?" Naruto thought Mitsuo's head was going to fall off with the way she moved it up and down. Naruto could not help but feel a swell of pride at the prospect of showing some of his skill, something he thought he had grown out of years ago. Naruto closed his eyes and called forth the familiar chakra from his old friend. Before Mitsuo's glacier-colored eyes, she witnessed Naruto's hair stand upright and begin to heighten in color. Naruto's entire body turned a rich gold and surged with powerful chakra that moved across his body like water. Black markings ran along his appendages and upper torso, converging in a spiral pattern on his stomach. Even his clothes had changed color and his cloak flowed with the rush of the chakra as if it was alive. The most startling thing about his current form was his eyes were golden and his pupils were shaped as dark slits. Mitsu had never witnessed anything like it and was so astounded by the golden form that her eyes were darting around with urgent speed, trying to analyze every detail. Mitsu was not the only one in awe of Naruto's form. From across the meadow, Kurochuchi could easily make out the intense, golden figure. She had not seen him in that state since the war. The young kunoichi took a bright moment to admire the man that was Naruto Uzumaki. Not only was he one of the most powerful shinobi alive, he was also an interesting enigma. The man could act like a child one second and then a mature adult the next. He was known to be intellectually brilliant and strategic in battles and certain conversations, but he could also be incredibly dense every now and then. He could easily destroy almost anyone that stood against him, but he always treated everyone with the utmost care and respect. He was so inconsistent, but also consistently genuine in his character. Naruto was a complex man and Kurochuchi loved that about him. Every time a specific instance or circumstance that was unique to the situation occurred between Kurochuchi and Naruto, she would always treasure it to a great extent. She wanted to remember every memory and every special moment she had with him. Those times were addicting for her. She craved them more and needed to appreciate more time with the blonde. By adding Mitsu to the mix, Kurochuchi only found more splendid moments to treasure. Despite how wonderful these instances were, Kurochuchi knew she was not fully appreciating them. That fact was the shadow's doing. Her doubts held her down and reminded her she could not have such cheerful moments with her hesitation. She did not deserve such joy. In that moment of silent brooding, the most bizarre scenario occurred. Naruto visibly winced from the other side of the meadow, causing Kurochuchi to ascend from her stupor. Mitsu noticed the movement too and gave the blonde a concerned look. Naruto shook his head suddenly and smiled sheepishly at the little girl. "Sorry, I just had some stomach pain for a moment." "It's nothing." That was odd, Naruto thought. Just a second ago, he had felt a horrible cloud of negativity from Kurochuchi. When he was in Kurama Chakra mode, Naruto could sense evil intent but, in recent years, he had mastered it enough to also sense negative emotions. They had to be strong emotions, however. Simple doubts within people were still beyond his current level of skill. But the emotions from Kurochuchi had been strong enough to make Naruto feel actual pain from the negativity. Whatever had been on Kurochuchi's mind since they had met in Kusa, must have been far stronger than Naruto had originally expected. Naruto's lips tightened for a moment as he pondered about the necessary actions he would need to take. He devised a plan that could help alleviate the situation. It would not be easy, especially for Kurochuchi, but it was inevitable. It is a good thing they were close to Kumo, Naruto mused as he focused back on his little student. Anyways, let's test your hand-to-hand skills. Come at me with everything you got, Mitsu. Mitsu nervously took a fighting stance and stared up at Naruto with intense concentration. Small beads of sweat formed on her brow and her anxiety about sparring with the powerful Naruto became palpable. Naruto smiled compassionately and his golden eyes were filled with tenderness at the innocent sight. "Don't worry, I won't attack. I'll only defend." With that positive statement, a burst of confidence erupted in the child's chest and she rushed forward. Mitsu threw an open palm towards Naruto's torso. She had poor training in taijutsu, but there had been a delicate basis implanted in her form of the Kitagawa style. Naruto was unfamiliar of the style, but he noticed it had many similarities to the style Haku had once utilized so many years ago. It was extremely sloppy considering Mitsu's current potential, but there was a lot Naruto could build off of with it. As he dodged and maneuvered away from Mitsu's strikes, Naruto carefully observed the dynamics of the style. Naruto maintained a pattern of not even touching the child as he moved gracefully away from her attacks. Obvious frustration was prevalent on Mitsu's face as she desperately tried to hit her target. Her desperation was getting the better of her and her form was losing the meager discipline it had started with at drastic levels. At one point, the child put her weight carelessly on her toes and Naruto effortlessly tapped her shin with his heel and caused her to lose her footing. Mitsu suddenly found herself on her back, staring up at a cheerful Naruto, his golden locks swaying gently with the constant surge of chakra emanating from his body. "Not too bad, Mitsu. Mitsu lifted her head up from the ground and felt slightly dizzy from her fall from earlier. She felt her face heat up from embarrassment. What are you talking about, Naruto? That was terrible. Naruto's brow furrowed at that remark. Don't be so hard on yourself, Mitsu. You have a ton of potential, yeah no. Truth be told, Naruto was not even close to exaggerating on that statement. She really did possess great potential. Naruto's sensory skills were heightened to a considerable extent while he was in Kurama Chakra mode and he could clearly see it. Mitsu had great chakra capacity. It was at a level that could potentially be higher than even Kakashi's levels. Although, to reach that level would take many years of training. Still, they were above normal and that made the blonde eager. You have me as a teacher, so you'll do just fine. Naruto's grin was broad and Mitsu was coerced into trying to mirror it. Seeing it was time to take a break, Kurochuchi walked over to her two companions with a bag of some ready-to-eat rations. A small container filled with food was thrust in front of Naruto's face and he smirked at the other end of the extended hand. Time for lunch, hero. Her words carried a gentle, yet solid trill to them. Naruto loved the sound of it. He grabbed the container and stopped the flow of chakra. Back to his regular state, Naruto sat down in the grass with his rations. Mitsu gratefully accepted her portion of the food and ate merrily as Kurochuchi sat down to eat next to her. As the three of them were eating their luncheon, Mitsu spoke with a mouthful of rice. How long until we reach Kumo? Don't talk with your mouth full, Mitsu. Kurochuchi's little quip left Naruto chuckling. She sounded so much like a mother in that moment and Naruto found it to be quite charming. Kurochuchi frowned at his antics and rolled her eyes, not fully understanding his thoughts on the matter. Mitsu looked apologetic and stared down at her food. Sorry, Kurone. Naruto decided to answer Mitsu's question and pointed his finger towards the peaks on the northwest side of the meadow. Kumo is on the other side of those mountains, so we'll probably make it there by tomorrow morning. We could actually reach the village tonight if we tried, but it would be wise to wait until tomorrow. It's best not to alarm a shinobi when it's dark out, after all. Mitsu nodded to show her understanding and Kurochuchi turned her attention towards where Naruto was pointing. She wondered if Kumo would end up helping her with the shadow. They finished their meal and decided to start moving again towards their destination. They packed up everything and set out down the path that cut through the meadow and made its way towards Kumo. The path quickly ascended towards higher elevations and became sharp in its course of direction. It was not long before Mitsu grew tired from climbing and Naruto carried her on his shoulders. A truly picturesque moment occurred between the three companions as they climbed the mountain path and the gorgeous canopy of many colors covered them. Glorious shades of green, gold, red, and purple flew by their bright heads and a beautiful second of peace fell on them. Kurochuchi looked at Naruto and there was a deep affection in those eyes that could not be denied. However, it honestly was only a second until reality set in. Naruto felt a pang of regret hit his soul and it felt like the same shade of those mesmerizing eyes before him. He had lied. Back in Taki, Naruto had lied to her. When Kurochuchi had confronted him about what he had said that night, he had denied it. He had said it was a moment of baseless passion and nothing more. That was the furthest thing from the truth and he had no idea why he had said it. Naruto, a man who valued honesty above so many other virtues, had lied and that fact resonated in the negativity of his mind. He had foolishly decided the situation would be better if he denied the truth and made her think nothing would change between them. Of course, it had resulted in a rift between the two shinobi and now that Mitsu was present in their lives, it appeared the rift was beginning to slowly close. However, Naruto felt he did not deserve that because he had lied. Naruto had lied to the woman he admired so much. He lied to the woman he loved. Later that day, the trio reached a point in the path that went through the mountains. A long, grassy, and flat area was located in the pass and that was where they decided to set up camp. The sun was setting behind the mountains and Naruto surmised it would be best to retrieve some firewood before nightfall. Kurochuchi and Mitsu stayed behind and finished getting their little campsite ready. As Naruto traversed through the myriad of stained trees, he brooded again over his past mistakes. It was unlike him to be so negative and gloomy about something that could not be changed, but there was no denying his regret on the matter. He knew he had hurt Kurochuchi. He did not completely understand her feelings about him, but he knew his decision had ruined some hope she had about their relationship. They could be growing at such a faster rate by now if he had only been honest to her. Why the fuck did he lie to her? Why did he push her away? She deserved more than that, and he was nothing but a fool. Naruto's pain was high enough to make him act out. He suddenly threw a fist at a tree in his emotional state, making it splinter and crack under the pressure. He could have easily demolished the wood if he wanted to, but there had been some self-control still there. In that moment, Naruto suddenly sensed a nearby presence he must have missed earlier because of his hard thoughts. When he heard the familiar, silky voice invade his ears, he smirked in its direction. Well, this is a rare sight. The owner of the voice stepped out from the golden shadows and leaned against the trunk of a tree. Naruto carefully examined his old friend and saw that except for the length of his hair, not much had changed about him physically. It also made him glad to know he was taller than him now. You should cut your hair. It looks greasy, Naruto said. The blonde's comment allowed Sasuke to give a small smile. I could say the same about you. It's been a while, Naruto. Naruto felt all of his emotion melt away and he focused on his best friend. It really has. Naruto's eyes were downcast. Sorry that you had to see that. I'm kind of going through something right now. Sasuke's expression seemed to betray the fact that he knew what Naruto was upset about. Does it have to do with those two females you're traveling with? Naruto knew better than to ever think he could get something past his perceptive friend. Naruto was still relatively new at reading people, but Sasuke was quite proficient at it. Plus, who knew how long Sasuke had been watching the trio's journey? Naruto should not have been surprised, but his friend was proficient at that too. One of them, at least. I hope it's the older one, Sasuke said with a stoic face. Naruto blinked and paused for a moment at Sasuke's attempt at a joke. Naruto found himself chuckling after that pause and nodded. It was a successful attempt. Yeah, it is. That's a cute family you got then, Naruto. I approve. Naruto thanked him and mused over the compliment. After he completely stopped laughing, his expression became a little more serious. So, what are you doing here? Sasuke tilted his head towards the direction of Kumo. I finished some business in Kumo earlier today that I had with the Raikage. Is he still sore about what you did to his arm? Sasuke smirked at his friend's remark and unconsciously glanced to his own missing left appendage. Naruto had been the one to request a new arm, but Sasuke had refused the offer when the time had come. Not really. Are you still sore about what I did to yours? Naruto shook his head and grinned brightly. Not in the least. Considering I took out yours too, I'm pretty sure we're even. Naruto paused again for a moment as he remembered an old promise. His eyes glazed over at the dismal memory. Hey Sasuke, you should go home. Sakura could really use your company right about now. I think it's been long enough. Naruto looked up to stare at his friend's dark eyes and saw an unexpected sight. There was sorrow and regret in those eyes that typically always masked feelings. Naruto was touched his old friend trusted him enough to witness such a rare privilege. I know, Naruto. But I can't yet. My work's not finished yet. Naruto felt annoyed by that weak answer. Oh, I see. The work that is obviously more important than the woman you love isn't finished. That makes complete sense. Sarcasm isn't going to help this, Naruto. Then maybe going back to Konoha will, Sasuke. Sasuke's eyes and voice seemed to stop for a moment as he dwelled on Naruto's words. She needs you. She can't wait forever and I know you can't either. Sasuke smirked. You've always been rather good at figuring me out. Naruto reflected the smirk. Well, someone has to. Otherwise, you'll run off like you do and never be seen again. Alright, I'll think about it. Naruto still was not satisfied. Not good enough. Do we have to destroy more of the landscape for you to get over your stubborn opinions? Sasuke thought back to the last time they fought and knew the land probably would not appreciate another battle like that. Do you think that will make me change my mind? Naruto shrugged. It worked last time. Sasuke could not argue with that. He sighed in defeat and slumped his shoulders back to indicate he had truly succumbed to his friend's words. Fine, I'll pay her a visit. Naruto's signature grin was brought out as the sun finally set behind him. Sasuke really did miss that smile. Great. I wish you would just stay there, but I'm not about to count my losses. Sasuke smiled softly at that. Not like there's much to count. With the conversation appearing to be done, Sasuke turned around to head towards the mountain path. However, he still had something to say. Naruto, it's going to be alright. Just be honest with her next time. Naruto felt like his chest was much lighter after hearing such positive words from his friend. He would be lying if he said he did not appreciate his friend's perception and help from time to time. He also remembered one more thing he had to ask. Hold on, Sasuke. Sasuke turned his head and glanced at his friend with one eye. Did you end up finding it, what it means to be a shinobi? Sasuke turned around to fully face Naruto and surprised the blonde further by actually smiling. It was a smile that bore friendship and love that only the two of them could possess. Now that's rare, Naruto thought. Yeah, I did. Take care, Naruto. And with that, Sasuke was gone and Naruto felt warmer from the experience. Even though they did not discuss his dilemma directly, he was better for it. It seemed if the matter was kept unattended, then nothing would change. He would need to tell her the truth eventually and salvage what they could from the wreckage they had created. It would have to be after Naruto's plan was reached, though. If it worked like he hoped it would, of course. When Naruto came back to the campsite with an armful of firewood, Kurochuchi looked up at him with a curious glance. What happened to make that smile of yours, hero? Naruto could not hide his joy even if he tried and his wide smile shined down upon her. Nothing, really. I just saw an old friend is all. Kumogakuer had not changed much since Naruto had last seen it. Most of the buildings were built into the rock faces of the many cliffs dotted throughout its infrastructure. The village had plenty of those buildings in accordance with its population, so there was not much of a need to build more. When the trio had entered Kumo, Naruto tried to make a beeline straight for the Hokage's headquarters. Of course, like most of the villages he had entered since he had left home, the residents prevented him from doing that. The people of Kumo were in an uproar at seeing the savior of the world and crowded around him before he had lost sight of the front gate. Men kept slamming their hands on his back and the women were squealing their confessions of love to him, infuriating Kurochuchi to a great extent. One girl even had the audacity to come and kiss Naruto, to which Kurochuchi's response was to murder said girl. Mitsu had alleviated the situation by holding Naruto's hand and asking for her own kiss from the blonde. Naruto had complied by kissing Mitsu's cheek. Kurochuchi was so touched by that innocent and sweet scene that she forgot about her wrath for a moment. After reminiscing with old war buddies and hugs from civilians, Naruto was finally freed from the chaos by an old friend. Darui had also grown in height over the years and stood just over an inch taller than Naruto. The man was typically laid back and nonchalant in his character and attempted to break up the crowd around Naruto. He told everyone to go back to whatever they had been doing and smiled when he focused on Naruto. Good to see you, again. It's been too long. Naruto grinned cheerfully at that greeting and gripped Darui's shoulder. It sure has. It seems that you beat me in the height department. Darui nodded at that and gestured with his head that there was business to attend to. Indeed. Boss wants to see you. We heard about the tragedy from the Shimo daimyo. We told him that we'd take care of it when you arrived. Boss wants a full report and, even though he probably won't admit it outright, he's missed you. Naruto smiled as he thought about the giant leader and grabbed Mitsu's hand who had been next to him. Of course. We were headed that way, anyways. They can come too, right? Naruto motioned to the two girls who Darui had just seemed to have noticed. Yeah, sure. Come with me. The three companions followed Darui as they moved through the streets and walkways of Kumo to reach their destination that was the Hokage's headquarters. Kumo-nin gave their regards and greetings to Naruto as they passed by. When they reached the front doors of the headquarters, the guards smiled and showed their gratitude to the war hero. He thanked them with the utmost sincerity as they stepped into the large building. When the four of them finally entered the expansive chamber that was the Hokage's office, Mitsu was instantly frightened by the booming voice that greeted them. Welcome, esteemed guests. Darui sighed at his leader's bombastic introduction. Boss, we've been over this. We're indoors, so there's no need to be so loud. The fourth Raikage, waved off Darui's remark and kept his face serious. Naruto knew the old village leader wanted to smile when he saw him. Ever since Naruto had persuaded the old man during the war, had developed a strong fondness for the war hero. Until you become the Raikage, Darui, I will not listen to your demands. Darui rolled his eyes. The gesture was not done out of disrespect but more out of admiration, oddly enough. It's not a demand, boss. It's more of a suggestion. I seemed to ignore Darui's words and stood up from his chair. Naruto Uzumaki. Come here, my boy. I want to get a good look at the man that saved the world. Naruto sauntered over and gave a big smile to the village leader. Hey, old man. How ya doing? Naruto knew when it was best to be formal and when to be casual. Around the man that disliked formalities among the strong, it was best to act as casual as possible. Naruto preferred that anyways. I'm stuck between happiness and anger. I'm glad to see you and was grateful to see your friend yesterday. I owe that man just as much as I owe you, after all. The Raikage frowned as he thought about the other matter he had to deal with. However, my anger comes from the fact that we have lost many lives recently. Naruto's face was grave and his tone became more professional. When matters became serious, Naruto typically leaned more on the formal side. Yes, I've come to give you a full report of that incident as well as introduce you to the sole survivor of the massacre. Naruto beckoned over Mitsu as she timidly approached his figure. She hid behind Naruto's tall frame and peeked up at the gigantic man that stood before her. I leaned over his desk and stared directly at the little girl. I don't suppose she is an Igarashi. Naruto shook his head and put his hand on her soft head. No, there were no surviving members of the Igarashi clan. Her name is Mitsu Kitagawa. I put his hand under his chin to scratch it as he thought on that information. I see. Well, Darui, it seems the storm release isn't as strong as we thought. Darui seemed to be slightly perturbed by that comment and had a small smile on his lips, nonetheless. The old man was only teasing him after all. I turned his attention back to Naruto. Very well. Tell me everything. As Naruto told what he had seen as well as what he had gathered from Mitsu's side of the story, A's expression became more and more somber. By the end of Naruto's report, the Raikage was barely keeping himself together. He was mournful and filled with rage at the same time as he heard the tale of tragedy and hate. Those damn Igarashi. We should have done more than just banish them when we had the chance. Naruto tried to alleviate the leader's emotional episode. That wouldn't have helped the situation, eh? You know that it would have made the matters worse and expanded the circle of hate to Kumo. I knew this, of course. He was only speaking from his heart instead of his mind, something Naruto could easily relate to. I seemed to calm down at Naruto's statement and leaned back in his chair. You're probably correct, Uzumaki. I seemed to be satisfied with the matter and stood up from his seat. All right, you probably want to see B, huh? Naruto nodded at the lovely suggestion. He had missed his old friend and fellow Jinchuriki. They had a lot of catching up to do. You bet. Naruto suddenly remembered his plan and lowered his voice to speak to A. Also, I was wondering if we could visit Genbu at some point. I mulled over the question for a moment. Of course you can, but Genbu's course is pretty far from the coast right now. You'll have to wait a couple months until he's closer. I'm sure B will escort you there when the time comes. Why do you want to go there anyways? Naruto's eyes sharpened as he answered. I need to visit the Falls of Truth. I wanted to ask the young man more but he decided to leave the matter alone. Fine. I'm guessing you will want a place to stay while you're here too. Naruto waved off the suggestion and humbly tried to refuse the offer. Oh, no. It's all right. I'm sure we can manage. Naruto was saying it more out of pleasantries, but I had different plans. Nonsense, Uzumaki. I won't have you stay anywhere else but here in my home. I'll have Mabi prepare some rooms for you all. Naruto rubbed the back of his head and felt extremely gracious by the Raikage's offer. Thanks, eh? The truth is that we're rather short on funds. I was planning on maybe taking a few missions from you to help us out, if it isn't too much trouble. I seemed outraged by that statement. Well, why didn't you say so? We don't have any missions for you, but I'm sure we can find you a job or two. I'll ask around and see what I can do. As for B, I'll call him and he should be here soon. Naruto thanked the Raikage once more and they left the room shortly after that. Mabi escorted the three to their rooms and Darui said goodbye to them for now. Mitsu and Kurachuchi were given a room to share that was on the other side of the hallway that separated them from Naruto's room. Naruto walked into his spacious accommodation and found a comfy chair to sit in. He sat and thought on the events of the last few days and wondered what would happen next. He thought especially about Sasuke and hoped all would go well with him in Konoha. Naruto could not doubt his friend's abilities and knew it would probably work out for him. Naruto also thought about the rift between himself and Kurachuchi. Would it really work out between them? Was there anything still salvageable? He could not lose her and loathed the very thought of such a thing happening. As Naruto was thinking, Mitsu had made her way into his room and jumped into his lap. The little girl laughed and hugged Naruto. I like it here, Narune. I think Kurone likes it too. I want to be with you two forever. Are we going to be staying long? Naruto smiled affectionately at the child and held her tight. I think so, Mitsu. I'm glad that you like it so much. I want to be with you too. When Naruto stared into those beautiful, ice blue eyes, he knew what Sasuke had said had been correct. It was going to be alright. Chapter 14, Shall Not Falter. Sakura felt more and more apathetic towards her friend with every passing word that she spoke. She did not want to be rude to Ino, but it was rather unfair of her to dump her problems on her like that whenever they got together. It was always about relationships too, of all things. Ino took another bite from her sweet dumpling and added another point to her one-sided argument. I've seen the way he looks at Hinata. He never looks at me like that. Suddenly, Sakura felt like she needed to add something reasonable to the conversation. Someone had to, at least. Ino, Sai loves you. He's not even remotely interested in Hinata and you know that. That man would easily die for you and considering he was once an emotionless bastard, that's saying something. When Ino had paused and her face flushed brightly, Sakura knew the conversation would finally advance. I guess you're right. I'm a lucky woman. After Ino took the final bite of her meal, she was suddenly struck with another interesting topic. Now we just need to find you a man. Oh no, Sakura thought. Not this whole thing again. Sakura could not even count how many blind dates she had been on thanks to the courtesy of her blonde friend. For the first couple of years after the war, Sakura always refused Ino's suggestions to date some noble's son or some handsome shinobi from another village. However, after the constant bombardment of Ino's tenacity and the increasing doubt in Sakura's heart, she had finally given in some time ago. She mostly did it to combat her loneliness, even though it barely made a dent. Many of her dates were really nice guys and seemed like they would make amazing husbands and fathers, but they all lacked one thing, they were not Sasuke. No matter who she had encountered these last few years, she could not forget where she put her heart. Sakura never went on a second date. Ino, please. I think I'm done with the whole dating scene. Ino had heard this one before. But Sakura, this guy is a hunk. Plus, he's like super sweet. Seriously, just give him a chance. Sakura had heard that one too. She was starting to think her life was scripted to be as monotonous as possible. All I've ever been doing is giving guys chances. I'm tired of being so merciful and polite. I can't do this anymore, Ino. Unless the next date you give me is Sasuke Uchiha, I could care less. Sakura's voice had been much louder and higher than she had intended for it to be. She regretted that just like so many other instances in her life. Ino was unfazed by the outburst. She took a sip from her drink and leaned into her chair. I think you're going to like this date then, Sakura. He's not Sasuke exactly, but he's really similar. Sakura quirked an eyebrow to indicate her mild interest. Ino continued, I'm telling you, this guy is from Kiri and he looks like he could be an Uchiha. He's not, of course, but maybe he has a distant ancestor or relative or something. Sakura still was not completely convinced. I don't know, Ino. Ino took out a pen and paper and began to scrawl something. She handed the piece of paper to her friend when she was finished writing. Here. This is an address to the restaurant where he will be waiting for you tonight. Be there by 8 and I promise that you won't be disappointed by who you find there. Sakura scoffed but took the paper anyways. She got up from her seat and turned towards the exit of the little cafe the two girls frequently occupied. I'll think about. I'll see you tomorrow at work, Ino. Sakura exited the cafe and stepped out into the mid-afternoon, sun-laden streets of Konoha. Autumn was a cheerful season in the large village with the busy street vendors selling their ripe bounties of the harvest. Patrons from all around the land came to find great deals and enjoy the peaceful atmosphere Konoha was famous for year-round. Sakura decided to pick up some rice while she was out and found a great price from a rice farmer she knew well. The old man took her money gratefully and told her it was going to get cold tonight. I can tell, young lady. The old rice farmer tapped his worn knee as he sat on his stool. Sakura smiled tenderly at the friendly farmer. He always came this time of year to sell his harvest and Sakura loved visiting him every year. These old bones haven't failed me yet. It's going to be freezing tonight, heed my words. Sakura's smile weakened a bit. It did not really matter to her whether it was cold or not. She had not felt warm in years. Sakura carried her bag full of rice over to her humble abode on the edge of town. She climbed the stairs of her apartment building up to the third floor and unlocked the heavy door that led to her room. She put the rice on the counter of her small kitchen as well as the paper Ino had given her and went out onto her convenient balcony. Sakura gazed out upon the sunny village that had always been close to her scarred heart. She loved her balcony and frequently took advantage of it, especially when she was feeling pensive. In recent months, however, it held another meaning. It was the last place she had seen Naruto. Sakura's two most important people had left her and she never felt more alone. Ino was her best friend and her co-worker, but the blonde kunoichi did not have that special place like Sasuke and Naruto did. There was Kakashi but he was typically busy with his Hokage duties. Tsunade was not as free as one would think either. The former Hokage was always called upon by neighboring countries for her medical expertise and Sakura had grown accustomed to seldom seeing her teacher. Even if she did get to see her friends more often, it was more her own decision to remain distant from them. There were only two men that could mean so much to her. Sakura was used to feeling guilty about the way she treated Naruto. She bullied and hurt him on more than one occasion and even when she thought she was doing the right thing by him, he was so pure and righteous in his way of showing her she failed in her poor attempt. He was angry when she lied and when she was anything other than herself. He had always been there even when Sasuke had not been. But she loved Sasuke. She put Naruto through so much heartache because of that and the worst thing was the blonde never held that against her. He always forgave her and told her their friendship was enough for him. That man knew pain better than most but he still managed to smile and cheer. She missed him so much. And then there was Sasuke. Sasuke Uchiha, the man that was easily identified as an enigma. That was where the identification process typically ended because the man was so mysterious in his nature and that intrigued the female mind to great lengths. However, Sakura knew him better than most and that fact only made her love him more. She yearned for his deep, onyx eyes and his strong touch that said more words than his mouth ever could. Everything around her constantly reminded her of him, especially when a night bore a crescent moon. They had left so much unsaid and the rehearsals in Sakura's mind of what needed to be heard had yet to be manifested. She missed him so much. Sakura took a deep breath and laid her chin in her soft hand. God, she was depressing. She felt so lonely that Ino's proposal was sounding better and better with every passing moment of unhealthy thought. Sasuke and Naruto were not coming back anytime soon, if ever, and the sooner she coped with that, the better. Finally, after several minutes of mental debate, Sakura went inside and clutched the crumpled paper to read its contents. It couldn't hurt, right? She never really knew who she was trying to convince anymore. Ino had been right. The man she had set Sakura up with actually looked incredibly similar to Sasuke Uchiha. There were a few obvious differences, but they did not dampen the intrigue in Sakura's probing eyes. He smiled more than Sasuke ever did and he had more joy in his dark eyes but for the most part, his hair, face, and muscle build were almost exactly like Sasuke's. His nose was a tad thinner and his forehead was a bit more pronounced, but they were minor differences. He had a small scar that ran jaggedly along his neckline, but it was easily discarded after the initial observation. Sakura crossed her legs in her seat and smoothed out the thin wrinkles in her black dress with a free hand. She had been worried if she had overdressed for the date, but when she saw his semi-formal attire, the anxiety had melted away. "Sorry, what did you say your name was again?" Her date put up his hand in a dismissive manner and chuckled buoyantly. "It's totally fine. It's Saburo." He gave her a sheepish smile and rubbed his arm with his opposite hand. "I was actually there during the war with the Alliance. I saw you, Sakura, along with Sasuke Uchiha and Naruto Uzumaki. It really is an honor to meet you. The whole world owes all of you a great deal." Sakura was accustomed to this conversation and others like it. Many people had expressed their gratitude after the war. The number of her admirers and suitors skyrocketed and she still felt like she was reeling from the blow. At least, this man was earnest in his attempts. "Well, you're welcome. However, I'm afraid that I didn't really do much of anything. Sasuke and Naruto took care of most of it." Saburo's dark eyes brightened at that remark. "Oh? But weren't you the one that saved Naruto from death and helped Sasuke reach his destination? Also, I believe that there are many accounts about how you helped defeat Kaguya at Satsuki by directly striking her from above." Sakura could feel her face heat up and she averted her eyes from looking directly at Saburo. "Yes, well. All of that is true, but most of those accounts are also greatly exaggerated." Saburo chuckled again. Sakura wondered if she could learn to enjoy that sound. "I'm sure. Thank you for meeting with me, Sakura. I'm taking a leave from Kiri for now and I must say that Konoha is beautiful this time of year." Sakura felt a tad absent-minded from what the man was saying. She was still trying to determine if coming on this date was a good idea. Despite this, she excelled at seeming to be paying attention when it was necessary. "Yes, it is. Tell me about Kiri, Saburo." For a few hours, she and Saburo conversed about many topics and relished each other's company over a delicious dinner. Sakura actually enjoyed herself for once and felt a connection with the Kirinin, as weak of one as it was. By the end of the date, Sakura had accepted his invitation for a second date. Saburo had offered to walk her home that night but she had politely declined. She wanted to let out some steam and think on what had occurred during dinner. Later that evening, Sakura left her house and roamed through the inky streets of Konoha towards one of the training grounds. She had stopped at her house to change into some heavier, more worn-out, clothes to train in. On her way to the grounds, the trees whistled with the chilly wind and Sakura realized the old rice farmer had been correct in his prediction. She reached her favorite spot on the grassy field and started doing her warm-up exercises. What in the world was she doing? She went on a date with a man she barely knew and now she was going to go on another one with him. Sakura was caught between herself. A part of her was furious because only Sasuke could have a place in her heart and the other part was thrilled that she was finally moving on. She could not wait forever and there was no sense in arguing over that fact. She wanted Sasuke to come back and be with her, but who knew when something like that would happen? Questioning if that would even happen was just adding fuel to the doubt. She hated this so much. She smashed a fist into the earth and the ground split into fragments by the sheer strength of her strike. There was a still moment where Sakura kept her hand implanted in the ground and remained motionless with nothing but her thoughts. The breeze picked up and cut through her heavy training clothes and made her skin cower. She felt so cold. It had been so very long since she felt warm. No matter who she met, who she talked with, who was around her, what was said, and what was there, Sakura felt so alone. She sensed that if she could describe what loneliness felt like, she would end up describing what it meant to be cold instead. She deserved some happiness though, right? Being with Saburo was a good thing and she felt like he would be a nice lover. But will he make you warm again? Sakura felt her eyes moisten a little and she fell to her knees. No, he probably would not. What was she doing? She needed Sasuke and no one else. No one could ever replace him and she despised that realization. No one deserved this kind of suffering. It was ripping her apart and she just wanted it to end. At some point, Sakura's thoughts manifested themselves into words. I don't want to feel cold anymore. The wind whispered back, neither do I. At first, Sakura thought the whisper of the wind was a human voice. But after a few seconds, she realized she had heard a reply and it was not from the wind. She could not believe her eyes when he stepped out of the foliage on the edge of the grounds. Sakura's vision became blurry as tears warmed her stained face. Sasuke. That was all she could say, and before she knew it, he was standing directly in front of her. He knelt down and stared at her tear-stained features. Sakura could not believe it. Sasuke was not only back, but there was something in his eyes she had all but forgotten about: love. There was a lot of pain in those eyes too, but they pushed past that and showed the true affection for the person they were beholding. Sakura's messy hair suddenly fell to cover one of her eyes, and Sasuke reached forward to push the strands behind her ear. Hello, Sakura. Sorry that I took so long. There were many thoughts that bounced around Sakura's mind in that unbelievable moment. There was some ferocity, considering Sasuke had no idea what he had put her through by taking so long, and he should be more mindful of her feelings. There was also some spite based off the fact that her character always had some as an almost default response to most situations. However, the most prevailing thought was one of relief. When she gazed into the icy pain Sasuke bore, she knew he had been hurting just as much as her. She let it go for now. She loved him, after all. As Sakura leaned forward at the precise moment when Sasuke moved closer to, she was able to respond with one word directed at him. Idiot. Her lips wrapped around his, and Sakura could not have dreamed of a better moment. She loved him so much. Sakura barely recalled Sasuke picking her up with one hand and carrying her back to her home. Neither of them asked questions because they were occupied with each other's mouths too much. What she did remember was her bed and the feeling of Sasuke's warm skin caressing her own. When he held her and touched her with his strong hand, she knew it had been worth the wait. He was so tender to her, and she had yearned for this experience for most of her life. Her naked skin practically drank the taste of him, and she knew true pleasure that night. She was loving the one she loved. As both of them fulfilled each other's dreams, Sakura noticed the faint gleam of the moon peek through her curtains. She smiled and kissed her lover again by the glow of the crescent moon. A knock resounded in the delicate room, and Sasuke rose from the sheets. The noise had come from her front door, Sasuke realized. He turned to stare at her still, sleeping form, and he felt his heart surge a bit. The night before was one he had been anticipating for some time. Sasuke grabbed a robe hanging in her room and proceeded to answer the door. When Sasuke opened the door, the bizarre thought that he was staring into some crude mirror passed by. A man that resembled himself looked extremely embarrassed when Sasuke answered the door. Sasuke quirked an eyebrow, but his face remained completely emotionless. His standard, stoic features took over. The man managed to not stammer when he addressed Sasuke, to which he deemed impressive. Oh, I'm sorry. I must have the wrong place. I was looking for Sakura Haruno. Sasuke merely blinked at the man. You didn't get the place wrong. The man's mouth hung open and bewilderment was clearly evident on his face. He seemed to struggle with what to say next when Sasuke heard a sweet voice behind him. Sakura was wearing a robe that was of the same design as the one Sasuke was garbed in. She stood behind him and looked out beyond his high shoulder. Her worn-out eyes blinked tiredly and she yawned. Who is it, Sasuke? She did not hear an answer to her question because her attention was focused on Saburo's figure on the other side of the doorway. The sleep in her eyes evaporated in an instant and her face flushed brightly. Saburo. Oh, this is. She felt like a machine that could barely move its joints when she gestured towards Sasuke. Saburo seemed to finally realize what was happening. Sasuke Uchiha? Yes, I recognize him. He turned his eyes and fixed them on the dark, robed man. It's good to see you have returned. Sorry for bothering you. Have a nice day, you too. Sasuke remained silent and watched the man retreat. His face was still stoic until his lips curved slightly when he turned to Sakura. You've been busy. Sakura was so surprised by what had happened, and Sasuke's implication felt like a spark was lit. He's just a friend, all right? No man's been to my apartment, if that's what you're insinuating. Sasuke's smile got a tad bigger. Until now, that is. It was rather amusing for Sasuke when he saw the realization of the previous night awaken in Sakura's features before him. She had been so caught up with the moment that her better judgment had accepted him. Her face looked like it was going to melt off with the amount of heat that was being pumped into it. She brought both hands up to her cheeks and put her back against the wall. Did we? Oh my. Sasuke sat down in the small hallway and leaned his back against the opposing wall. We did. Did you not enjoy it? Sakura did not think she could be more flustered than she already was. She was wrong. Of course, I did. But it all just happened so fast and I hadn't seen you in so long that I... She trailed off and thought back to what he had done to her last night. It was everything she had dreamed it would be. Despite this, her heart did not want it to be so easy. It could not be so simple when she had gone through so much to reach this point. Love could not be that way. And now I'm back and you don't need to worry anymore. Sasuke's comment hit a sore spot. For how long, though? The question felt automatic and sharp. Sasuke's expression showed confusion by her inquiry. What? How long until you leave me again, Sasuke? How can I know that you'll stay with me forever? How do I know you haven't been with any other women? You think that by just showing up and sleeping with me, everything would just magically be okay? Sakura did not know why she was being so difficult. She probably should have just been grateful for what she had and listened to the logic of the situation. Unfortunately, there had been too much pain and emotion built in this relationship already, and for it to work, they had to handle the problems within it. Sasuke was not accustomed to this scenario and tried to alleviate it. But Sakura, I've changed. I'm the same, confused boy who did not understand what he wanted. Do you think that just automatically forgives everything that happened? I thought you already forgave me though. Sakura closed her eyes and clutched her head. I did. I mean, I know I did. But it happened. You're acting like it never did and that's not fair. I've been hurt and you're undermining everything. Sasuke remained stoic. Don't you think you're being a little unreasonable right now? That was a mistake. Sasuke knew it was as soon as he witnessed an angry flash pass over her eyes. The muscles in her mouth twitched into a snarl and the hands that held him so gently last night balled into fists. Get out, Sasuke. Sasuke had never intended for what he said to be inferred like that, but the damage was already done. Sakura's heart was extremely fragile and for him to expect that his presence alone would solve all of the problems they had created, was rather foolish. Sasuke wanted more than anything than to explain himself clearly and try to appeal to the love of his life, but he knew it would just make matters worse. Sasuke masked his emotions like he always did, took his change of clothes, and left the apartment without another word. Sakura released the tension in her hands after Sasuke left and sank deep into the floorboards under her. Despite the dramatic event, Sakura felt a little relieved. She had vented out some pent-up frustration for once. She was not certain it was a healthy release of emotion, but she still felt better for it. This fact did not stop the tears, however. They came in a torrent and Sakura felt like shit for a long time after that. Whatever she ended up feeling was never a singular emotion, it seemed. She was always feeling good and bad at the same time. She did not know if everybody else felt like that too and were just really proficient at handling themselves or not. All she knew was she was crying because despite her best intentions, she just made the one who had her heart leave her once again. She could practically taste the irony. It tasted like tears. Sasuke was seated high above the ground and nestled in the leaves of a large maple tree. The afternoon sun managed to reach his form and gave him some much-needed warmth. He sat and watched the busy village from a distance. He did not want to alert the villagers yesterday because he knew the commotion would have stirred up a predicament he did not want to deal with. Kakashi would have showed up, asked for his report, and made trying to get to Sakura that much more complicated. The night before had been the best of his entire life and it seemed like it had been wasted because of the unfortunate argument earlier that morning. She could not have meant all of that, right? She had missed him just as much as he had, if not more so. So why did she act like that? Maybe she had been that way because she had missed him so much. Maybe he had not treated her feelings with the proper care. He had been selfish to think everything would work out if he had simply showed up and loved her. After last night's events, he had thought his assumptions were correct. She had loved him in the purest form, and yet, she felt so distant now. He had to face the consequences of his decisions. Sakura had given him multiple occasions to come back and be with her. She had been upfront and honest with her intentions from the beginning. He never did that. He was not vocal with her and failed to communicate his feelings. He was inadequate at such things. He needed to correct his mistakes and actually talk to her for once. He needed to show her he had changed and was worthy of her love now. He could stay and actually be with her now. They could start over and live in a world filled with their love for each other. Thanks to the morning's events though, he would be lucky to even get a minute of her time now. He did not deserve her. Sasuke shook his head and pushed aside his doubts. He strengthened his resolve. He jumped from the tree and made his way towards Sakura's apartment. Sasuke was judicious in making sure no one recognized him as he traversed the streets of Konoha. When he reached Sakura's apartment door, he knocked on it sharply and waited. There was no answer, and Sasuke used his blessed eyes to sense her presence. She was not in her home, and Sasuke broadened his senses to try to find the young woman. When he found her, he groaned inwardly at the location she was in. This was going to be tough. I don't want to talk about it anymore, all right. Sakura had gone to work that day and she regretted ever telling the events of last night to her best friend. Ate this stuff up and was fixated on the fact that Sasuke was back. But I mean, Sakura, you slept with him, right? Ino's eyes were wide and she had the most peculiar smile on her face. That's not important right now, Ino. We have a client coming in, so could you put it to rest just for now? Please. Ino did not really like that answer, but she knew she needed to be professional. She pouted and put both her hands into the front pockets of her white coat. She and Sakura had opened up their own medical clinic right next door to the hospital and received their own clients on a regular basis. The pay was amazing and the two women were well known for their medical capabilities. Tsunade had trained both of them well. Ino was skilled, but they both knew Sakura had surpassed their teacher long ago. Ino decided to give in for the moment. Okay, Sakura. But I want all the details later. Sakura nodded and opened the door to let in one of their regulars. It was an old woman that struggled with back problems. Sakura had performed surgeries on her back before and found it to be as healthy as it could be at her age. Sakura had to give her regular treatments every week to help the back pain. The old woman smiled and greeted the two girls. Sakura told her to take a seat and she began her checkup. She grabbed a clipboard and began to write the necessary paperwork. As Sakura made her observations, Ino spoke a thought she had on the other side of the little room. Where is Sasuke, anyways? Sakura snapped the pen she was holding. Ino. What did I just say? Suddenly, a knock was heard on the door and the receptionist rushed in. She was out of breath and her face was beet red. Harano-san. Excuse me, but you have an important visitor. I tried to tell him you were busy, but he was adamant and The poor receptionist was cut off as a tall figure entered through the doorway and gently pushed her out of the way. Sakura sensed an amalgamation of confusion and rage at the sight. Hello, Sakura. I apologize for the intrusion, but I must speak with you. The delight and wonder in Ino's eyes was not helping to quell Sakura's ire. Surprisingly, the old woman spoke before Sakura had a chance to. Oh, my. If it isn't the young Uchiha. My goodness, you are a handsome one. There has been a lot of controversy about you over the years, my dear. I always thought it was misplaced, if you ask me. I'm sure that Harano-san would gladly hear what you have to say. There was a sparkle in the old woman's eyes that Sakura had never seen from her before. Sakura had learned early on that it was best not to underestimate the elderly. Still, Sakura was upset. She folded her arms and glared up at Sasuke. Yes, Sasuke. I'll hear you out. What is it that you'd like to say in front of all us? This woman, Sasuke thought. She was doing this deliberately. She knew he was in an uncomfortable situation. She was making him have to pour his heart out in front of these people and completely embarrass himself. Sasuke realized it was probably for the best. If he could not set aside his pride and dignity for his love, then it would be meaningless. He needed to show her he had changed. Very well then. He cleared his throat and let the air around him fill his lungs, bringing him some relief. Sakura, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to undermine all that we've been through. I understand that I made you undergo some horrible pain and that I made you wait a really long time. That wasn't fair to you and I should have handled the situation better. I promise you that I haven't been with anyone during my travels. You've been the only one that I've wanted to be with. I've been so occupied with my sense of duty that I neglected you and your feelings. I want to change that here and now. I love you, Sakura Haruno. There was a pause as Sasuke collected his thoughts. His little speech was a little jumbled because he was so unused to this. Naruto was much better at this kind of thing. He was not done talking but he knew he was being really uncharacteristic right now. The expressions on the females' faces around him was a testament to that. Sakura blinked and stood up from her chair. Come with me, Sasuke. Excuse me. Sakura bowed to her patient and calmly strutted out the door. Sasuke followed silently behind her and closed the door as he made his exit. Ino was speechless as she stared at the old woman. The grin on the woman's face was surprisingly youthful. Sakura marched down a corridor and opened a door that led to a room that was only used for medical storage. She gestured for Sasuke to enter the room. Her face revealed absolutely nothing and was as neutral as she could make it. Sasuke tilted his head in a nod and walked into the quiet room. Sakura closed the door behind her and folded her arms once again. Her emerald eyes held back her emotions, but Sasuke could still make out some emotion in them. I can't believe you just did that. You are Sasuke Uchiha, right? This isn't some genjutsu. Sasuke waved his hands and shook his head. No, I know that it's really odd for me to do something like this, but I thought it was the only way I could show you I've changed. She put one hand into the side pocket of her lab coat and she brought up the other one to her chin. She fastened her immaculate eyes to his own. You're right. You are different. She narrowed her eyes. You have more to say. It was not a question. Sasuke nodded. Yes, I do. I'm tired of running around, Sakura. I'm here to stay this time. I wanted to tell you all of these things last night and this morning, but I was so caught up in the romance and the drama. You know that I'm not gifted at speaking my mind and properly communicating my intentions, but I know that I need to change that. This isn't easy for me, but I'm really trying. I want to love you properly and I'm still trying to figure out how. Sakura's eyes widened a bit. What do you want from me then? Sasuke responded almost immediately. Your forgiveness. Your love would also be great, but I understand that I'm nowhere near the point of deserving that. So you think you deserve my forgiveness then? No, that's not what I mean. Shit, I'm bad at this. I don't deserve anything from you. I've only made you suffer and that's the only thing that I'm good at doing to you. I've struggled with wanting to be with you because I've been afraid that I'll only hurt you more by being with you. I'm a miserable excuse for a human being that doesn't deserve a beautiful woman's love. I was so distraught by my own misgivings that I neglected you, which furthered your agony. When I finally realized all that I was putting you through, I thought I was too late. I see now that I need to be with you and no matter what we go through, I will be here now. I swear it. I won't leave you ever again. Sasuke let it out. He let out all the feelings that had been shoved into the corners of his soul. I'll buy a house for you. I'll live with you. I'll cook and clean for you. I'll raise wonderful children with you. I'll live for you, Sakura. Just please, forgive me. Accept me. Accept this awful, damaged fool that only wants to bring you the best in life. I love you, Sakura. I love you so much. There was a moment that stretched further than either party could completely comprehend. Sakura's lips were open slightly and she pondered the dark-haired man's words. Her eyelashes flickered as she gazed up at him. You're wrong, you know. Sasuke's throat felt tense. You're not bad at this at all. A beautiful smile formed on her perfect lips and Sasuke took a step closer. He chuckled as she jumped into his grasp. He wrapped his single arm around her and held her tightly, afraid her presence would disappear. I'm sorry that I've been such a bitch, Sasuke. My heart has been all over the place. One second I'm making love to you and the next I kick you out of my home. I'm so unstable and I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize for, Sakura. Sasuke smiled into her pink locks. Sasuke's relief was immense and he knew if Naruto was here right now, his grin would be far larger than his own. Oh, Sasuke, I love you. I've been waiting for you for so long. Her hold on him was full and unmatched. Sasuke breathed in the sweet scent of her hair. I know, Sakura. I'm here now. Let's start over now, alright? Let's make a new foundation to build our relationship on. The old one is rather shitty, don't you think? Sounds good to me. Sakura closed her eyes and buried her head into Sasuke's strong torso. They held each other in that wonderful moment that was one of the happiest for each of them. They finally had something to work with and it was long overdue. They were sure to go through more trials and arguments in their relationship, but they would make it work. Their determination was stronger than that and there was nothing that could tear them down. They had each other and neither could have wished for more. A delightful warmth filled their souls and they cherished its presence. The cold was gone and it was not going to come back. Chapter 15, Dark Necessities. 2 bowls of miso ramen, please. Kurochuchi's voice rang throughout the cheerful clamor of the bustling patrons around the ramen stand. Naruto popped his head out from behind the back curtain and his white chef hat tilted off to the side. Coming right up. Naruto grinned as he took some more fresh noodles from the nice pile that Mitsuo, wearing her own white hat, had been meticulously working on for the last few hours. The little girl knew she did not need to help but she said she liked making the noodles. Naruto grabbed some miso stock from the cupboard next to him and added it to the boiling pot of broth. He put the noodles into a separate pot of boiling water. Once everything looked good and hot, Naruto mixed it all together and poured the delicious concoction into 2 bowls. He then added some fish dumplings and vegetables on the tops of the bowls. He finished his immaculate display with an egg on both servings. He put both bowls on the counter just outside the curtain. 2 bowls of miso ramen. Kurochuchi, garbed in a white apron, came over to pick up the order. She had refused to wear a hat. Thanks, Naruto. Can you get me 1 bowl of tonkatsu ramen, please? Naruto gave her a thumbs up and was already reaching for another handful of noodles. You got it. Kurochuchi smiled and took the 2 bowls of ramen over to the customers. She placed the bowls on the dining counter and the 2 patrons thanked her for the food. Thank you. You guys make the best ramen in all of Kumo. Kurochuchi waved off their compliment but could not help but grin at their sincerity. Thanks, guys. I'll be sure to let the chef know. Enjoy your meal. She knew Naruto had probably already heard the compliment though. The man's ears were acute in their functioning. She had been right. Naruto felt warmed by the generous compliment and yelled towards the owner who was in the back, catering to the boiling process of the bones. They like it, Ji-chan. The old owner let out a hearty laugh and grinned at the tall blonde that had helped him considerably. Of course they do, my boy. You've learned from the best, after all. Naruto was eternally grateful for the esteemed tutelage of the elderly owner. He had learned the basic properties of how to make ramen rather quickly and greatly enjoyed it. When the Hokage had told Naruto he and his companions would receive pay by aiding an old man's ramen stand, the war hero had been thrilled by the proposition. For the last few months, the 2 shinobi and Mitsu had made ramen. Obviously, this was not the only event they had participated in. A few hours later, with the late winter sun retreating behind the mountains, Naruto called out to the owner. He had just finished putting the broth on simmer, so the leftovers could be used for the next day. Hey, Ji-chan. We free to go? Octopops is waiting for us. The owner chuckled and showed him a gaped smile. Get out of here, young man. Don't push yourself too far this time. I want you bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for tomorrow. Naruto grinned broadly and put an exhausted Mitsu on his shoulders. They met Kurochuchi outside of the ramen stand. She smiled wryly and followed after the poised figure that was Naruto. Honestly, don't you think we train too much considering we also work a ton, Naruto? Naruto thought about that for a moment. Probably, but I enjoy it way too much. You two can sit this one out if you need to. He was enthralled by the way Kurochuchi's smile morphed to be a little wicked. Who said that I wasn't going to train? She was really good at making his heart feel like an artificial pump that had problems keeping up with the rest of his body. The trio eventually reached their designated area they used for training, located on the outskirts of the village. Because it was usually too cold to train outside during the night this time of year, the Hokage had allowed them to use the expansive cave networks that were interwoven throughout the nearby mountains. There were multiple channels of magma that flowed throughout the mountains, allowing the caves to reach a comfortable level of warmth. There was specifically one enormous cave that was easily accessible on the edge of the cliffs they typically used to train in. Naruto and Killer Bee were not able to go all out when they were in the cave because they would quickly demolish the mountain that way. Even when they occasionally trained outside, they still had to be careful so they did not harm the nearby village. Naruto's control had grown over the years anyways, so it was not arduous to hold back in his case. When the trio entered the immense natural chamber, they saw Killer Bee meditating in the center of the cave floor. Killer Bee's voice echoed throughout the cave as he moved from his motionless state. The dark-skinned Jinchuriki's hair had grown over the years and so did his build. His frame was wider and more muscular, but his smile whenever he saw Naruto had not changed one bit. "Yo, Naruto. You finished with your ramen rain and ready to go all out and train?" Naruto gently dropped Mitsu to her feet and Naruto took a fighting stance with an eager face plastered on his mug. "You know it, Octopops." Kurochuchi barely had time to get herself and Mitsu out of the way before the sound of Killer Bee's signature whistle-like cry resonated around the natural walls. Killer Bee had launched a dynamic kick towards Naruto from across the cave and the blonde deflected it with a strong block. Naruto had already entered Kurama Chakra mode and quickly followed suit by throwing a punch at his old friend. From the edge of the cave, Kurochuchi and Mitsu had a great view of the fight with a glassy pool of water next to them. "All right, Mitsu. Are you sure you want to train tonight? You look like you're really tired. We can train tomorrow morning before work if you want." Mitsu turned her chilled eyes over to the image of a golden Naruto brushing off a strong uppercut. His eyes were lit with passion and his entire essence screamed exhilaration. Mitsu was captivated by him. "No, that's okay, Kurone. I want to become strong like Naruto. Can we do that water thing again, please?" Kurochuchi should not have been surprised. That blonde fool was just too inspirational. "Fine, focus your chakra to your fingertips then." Kurochuchi had decided to help Mitsu on her water nature a few weeks back. Naruto would give her individual lessons for her wind nature and Kurochuchi would help with the other respectfully. Killer Bee would occasionally help Mitsu out too with her water affinity and in improving her taijutsu. By making both of her chakra affinities as strong as possible, the end goal was that her skill of the ice release would increase substantially. At this point, Mitsu was capable of making a thin sheet of ice on the top of water, but that was the limit of her abilities. She was improving every day, nevertheless. Mitsu closed her eyes and sensed the water in front of her. She had done this a few times before, but today was different. Today she would see what she could do. She felt the energy in the water's fluid movements and flowed with it. Water morphed to its surroundings and slid with the current. Even when it seemed stagnant, water moved. Mitsu needed to move with it too. First, there was a state of submission where she became one with the water. When she reached that point, she pushed and willed it to move. She controlled the immense power of the moving force that was water. She felt the uprising surge in her fingertips and knew the water had no choice but to submit. She opened her eyes and saw a column of water rise from the surface of the pool. It was like a fountain with the top water cascading down and a current flowing upwards into it. Kurochuchi knelt down to Mitsu's height and put her hand on the child's shoulder. "Excellent, Mitsu. Now, hold it. This time we're going to try something new. When you feel you've grown incredibly intimate with the feeling of the water, let it burst." Mitsu nodded and concentrated. She tried to grow familiar with the peculiar feeling. It was like she was merely pushing the water, but she knew if she could shove it, the water would agree with the decision. Water was so submissive, she thought. No, that was not right. On second thought, it was simply humble in its strength. It knew it could decimate the world if it wished, but it loved life too much to do that. It had a deep anger to it, in spite of its normally tranquil nature. Mitsu searched for that underlying rancor. When she saw it, she was reminded of a deep, mysterious abyss that held more pressure than was conceivable. She clutched its core and tried to understand it. As its density surrounded her, she let it embrace her. Finally, after the core knew her, she shoved it away. A great blast of water shot up from the pool and skyrocketed towards the cave ceiling. The ceiling was over 100 meters above the ground and the powerful fountain was just short of it. Mitsuo held its force in place. Kurochuchi was beyond impressed. She had predicted the girl to be able to shoot maybe several meters or so, but the young child had greatly surpassed her expectations. She shook her head in disbelief. Naruto had said Mitsuo had amazing potential. Kurochuchi had not seen it until now. Who knows what the little girl was capable of? From across the cave, Naruto smiled as he marveled at the splendor of the fountain. It's about time, Naruto mused. Killer Bee stopped his onslaught and turned to bear witness to the intense spout of water. The older male's expression was stoic, but Naruto knew he was mesmerized. During the spar, Naruto had been paying close attention to Mitsuo's chakra. It had been calm and curious as it had explored the water-natured chakra. Once she had connected with the water's chakra and understood its essence, she had controlled it. Naruto felt proud of her and his smile fully became a grin. Mitsuo finally felt weary from her hold and released the water. The fountain quickly dissipated and the child felt lightheaded. Kurochuchi held her and nuzzled her head against Mitsuo's cheek in an excited and loving manner. That was amazing, sweetie. I can't believe you just did that. That was some high-level use of your abilities. Soon, you will be able to do that without needing a water source. Mitsuo gave her teacher a drained smile. Good. I can't wait, Kurone. I feel really weak now, though. Kurochuchi let out an embarrassed laugh and picked the girl up. All right, honey. Despite Mitsuo's obvious fatigue, Kurochuchi could see the joy in her crystallized eyes. Kurochuchi's love for the little girl was growing every day. She had a special connection with her and felt like a big sister. No, that was not correct, she felt more like a mother figure for the child. Thankfully, Kurochuchi had been correct in her assumptions about Mitsuo. The girl had been helping her with her doubts and hesitation indirectly. The shadow had little power when she was interacting with the little girl. Of course, the shadow was still present and was against ever leaving her. Still, it was nice being with someone that distracted her from the pain. Kurochuchi knew she needed to speak about her problems with someone and soon. She was just so hesitant. Kurochuchi felt some cold humor from that thought. Hesitation was the problem after all. She turned around and yelled across the cave at the two Jinchuriki. Let's call it a night, boys. Naruto called back. Okay. Naruto stopped the flow of Kurama's chakra and returned to his normal state. I know that wasn't much of a spar, Octopops, but you good. Killer Bee brought his hand out in the form of a fist. Hey, yo. Get the girls to bed, Naruto. Naruto bumped his fist into his good friends and smiled brightly. See you tomorrow, Octopops. With that, Naruto ran after the retreating figure of Kurochuchi carrying a fatigued Mitsuo. The trio left the cave and returned to their temporary lodgings in the Kumo headquarters. When they reached their rooms, Kurochuchi took Mitsuo to bed and Naruto ran to his pile of papers and scrolls he had not bothered to organize. He grabbed a blank scroll and began to write a long overdue report to Kakashi. He included the part about Mitsuo's recent development and about the ever-present rift between him and Kurochuchi. Naruto had almost finished his report when he heard a knock at his door. He opened the door to find Kurochuchi, who appeared to be mentally debating something. Naruto lifted an eyebrow and flashed a curious grin. Well, hello. He added a goofy, high-class tone to his voice that made the kunoichi roll her eyes off impulse. All of a sudden, her face changed and it seemed she was focused on what was in front of her. I want to talk to you about something. Kurochuchi's invitation hung in the air for a moment. Naruto's expression became tender and his smile was sincere. Well, it's still relatively early in the night. Care to take a walk with me, then? Kurochuchi visibly agreed and the two shinobi left the great building. The village of Kumo had a healthy nightlife that established a positive and bright atmosphere around its warm area. Shinobi and civilians alike were roaming around, enjoying the winter night. It was just late enough in the season to where the cold was starting to vanish away and the promise of a pleasant spring was on the horizon. Naruto and Kurochuchi turned a corner on the busy main path and found a much quieter pathway to saunter through. As the two shinobi ambled along, Naruto broke the fresh silence. "So, what did you need to talk about?" Kurochuchi's eyelids lowered and she looked down at her shifting feet. "It's something that's been on my mind for a long time." Her jaw suddenly stiffened and the pink in her eyes seemed to brighten. "I have a lot of grief, Naruto. I've been dealing with a lot of pain recently and I realize that just bottling up isn't going to help me. I need to talk about it." Of course, Naruto had known about the pain for a few months now, but it was not his turn to speak yet. He simply concentrated on Kurochuchi's words and let her talk. "Something happened before we met in Kusa. Something horrible." Naruto arched his neck so he could lean closer. This was it, he thought. He was finally going to know what had been holding her back from what she could be. She had been so different from the woman in Ame and he had wanted to know why for so long. The anticipation was agonizing for him. Kurochuchi was furthering the torment by pausing in her speech. The silence was protracted and Naruto had to break it. "What happened?" Kurochuchi took a moment to calm herself with a deep breath and spoke again. "On my way to Kusa, I met a woman on the path." Kurochuchi told Naruto about the favor the woman had given her, the burnt house, the mountain tunnels, the gang, the sexual assault, the rage and massacre preceding it, and the suicide. She did not leave anything out, in relation to the events anyways. She wanted to talk about the result of the tragedy in the shadow, but its essence strengthened at the thought and coerced her into saying nothing about it. After Kurochuchi had finished the story, she moved her eyes up to Naruto to see a sorry sight. There was pain there. The blue in his eyes was a cold shade and it reflected her sorrow respectfully. Kurochuchi could not believe this man. His sympathy was greater than any other person's that she had ever known. Naruto stopped in his tracks and grabbed her hand. She felt her blood rush to her face and she was taken aback by his sudden gesture. "Thank you, Kurochuchi. I'm so touched that you would trust me with this information." Kurochuchi's surprise grew to even greater heights. She had been wrong, it was not sympathy the blonde possessed but empathy. He was grateful by the fact that she would even tell him all of that and she could not imagine a better person to tell her woes to. This man understood pain better than she had thought. Naruto was not a man to be underestimated and was surely full of surprises, but she knew that already. Somehow though, knowing still did not change anything. Her affection for him was speeding up and Kurochuchi's mind could not keep up with it all. "Well, of course, hero. Who else would I tell?" Naruto ignored the rhetorical question and straightened his back to stand at his full height. He stood over her and she could feel his presence, making her blood go into overtime. Naruto's eyebrows scrunched slightly in thought. Why did you hesitate when the girl was about to harm herself? Naruto did not mean to rush into the most difficult question so quickly, but he was not really a guy to beat around the bush, at least innately. When he was around people he trusted and loved, it was really easy for him to resort back to his former ways. Kurochuchi understood that much, so she did not reprimand his sense of tact on the subject. Still, it did not make the question any easier to swallow. "I don't know, Naruto." She was not lying because if she knew the answer to that question, the shadow would cease to exist. She did not know how she knew that, but she understood they were probably connected. She felt Naruto knew that too, hence the question. "But I want to." Naruto flicked his eyes away from her for a moment. "Luckily, I know how you can find out." Kurochuchi's hope rose. "Really? How?" She did not bother to hide her eagerness. She had waited too long for this. "You were there before, actually. Do you remember that island turtle that I and Killer Bee used to hide from the Akatsuki during the war?" Kurochuchi nodded. She remembered that was the day Kabuto had outsmarted her. She was not keen on remembering her failures, but that was why she was in her current predicament it would seem. "How could I forget? I had to escort that giant creature back to Kumo's coast after you left. I hear they're still mad about you breaking that barrier." Naruto rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't really have a choice on the matter. Anyways, on the back of that turtle is an ancient waterfall that can transport a person into their mind. It's similar to a mirror and shows a person their true self. A person can directly face their mind and its deepest workings. I used it once and I was changed forever after it. I think it would be best if you went yourself and found out the answer to your questions. He paused for a moment as if the next part was optional information. However, I promise you that it won't be easy. Are you interested? Kurochuchi had heard rumors of the fabled waterfall before, but she did not know it actually existed. She would be lying if she said she was not interested in the proposal, but she was more frightened than anything else. Directly facing the shadow would be strenuous, but she realized it was necessary. She wanted to move on. Life was moving forward and she needed to as well. All right. When can we leave? Naruto smiled with his eyebrows lowered. As soon as Genbu is close to Kumo's shore, which shouldn't be long from now. I can talk to A in the morning and figure out when exactly we can reach it. Naruto paused for a moment and then thought of something. So, why did you decide to tell me all of this now? Kurochuchi was getting really annoyed with the constant blood rushing to her face. She was a grown woman, but the blonde was extremely talented at making her feeling flustered. She never knew a man like him and she supposed that was a good thing. After all, he did not like liars. I think it was Mitsuo, Kurochuchi said. That girl kind of inspires me. Naruto nodded knowingly. He understood that very well. He thought inspiration was one of the most beautiful forces in the world. It had more power than many other processes like it. Indeed. She's a miraculous little girl. Kurochuchi smiled affectionately up at him. You're not too bad yourself, hero. Her eyes glazed over with emotion, and the rossiness in them shined through. Thank you, Naruto. The truth is that there's another reason why I wanted to tell you all of this and try to settle it out. I want to grow closer to you, Naruto. My pain won't let me do that, though. That's why I want to conquer it. Naruto's eyes widened and he felt the tip of his nose heat up. It did not take long for that heat to cover the rest of his face. And why would you want to do that? Because I love you. She almost said those waiting words. They were there, on the edge and eager to jump towards the light that was Naruto. The words did not want to come though. They were too familiar with the shadowy reaches behind them. The shadow sent its icy fingers and clutched the words. Kurochuchi could not say them. The wind came in that moment and cut through her thick jacket. She felt so cold. The warm light was right there in front of her, but she did not deserve it. She was a fool for thinking that merely talking about her problems could solve everything. Doing that would undermine the potency of the situation. The shadow was much too strong for that. In the end, Kurochuchi could only utter, because you're a good person. It was not a lie, just not the complete truth. Naruto seemed to be satisfied by that answer. The walk back to the headquarters was filled with light conversation and both parties were content with that. However, for Naruto, there was an underlying thought in the back of his mind as he chatted with Kurochuchi that night. Right before she had said her reason behind her words, Naruto had seen she was concealing something. Hopefully, the falls of truth would fix all of that, but his impatience was strong in that moment. He wanted to know her real reason because he had a hunch he could relate. The Hokage told Naruto the next morning that Genbu was scheduled to be close to the coast by the end of the week. Naruto was determined to set out straight away and did not delay. With that, Naruto and the girls started to pack up their belongings. Naruto arrived late that same morning to the ramen stand and found the old man to be perturbed by his tardiness. When Naruto told him they would leave soon for the coast, the old man was distraught. Naruto had tried to be gentle in his words, but the man was overcome with grief. Nevertheless, the owner seemed to understand. Naruto said his goodbyes and told him the girls would do the same before they left. Killer Bee had insisted he would accompany Naruto and the others to Genbu. He missed Motoi and wanted to be with Naruto for a little while longer. There had been little resistance to that proposition, even from A, and it was decided unanimously. Darui and Mabi were both understanding of the trio's leaving but were not happy about it. The Hokage was not audibly bothered by the action, but Naruto could tell he was going to have a tough time saying goodbye. The twitch in his upper lip was a testament to that. All of the Kumo residents knew their esteemed guests had to leave eventually, they simply did not want to cope with it just yet. The group of 4 left at high noon a few days later. The promise of spring was in the air that day. It would not be long before its cheery air would sweep through the land. The birds could feel it too as they flew happily over the group gathered at the village's main gate. Most of Kumo's residents were there to see the group off. There were not many complaints about that. The Raikage put a lot of force into the one-armed hug he gave Naruto before he left. It was so uncharacteristic of the village leader that many of the onlookers watched with startled expressions. Darui put his hand on Naruto's shoulder and told him he would hopefully be the Raikage the next time they met. Mabi bowed respectfully to all 4 of the departing and wished them safe travels. The old ramen stand owner was there too. Mitsu went up to him and kissed him on the cheek. The elderly man broke after that and wept in front of all of them. After everyone gave their farewells, illustrated their best wishes, exchanged tears, and said what they did not entirely mean, the group of 4 left Kumo. In spite of the bittersweet vibes of the departure, the group's peregrination towards the coast was light and airy. The journey down the mountain was comprised of Killer Bee's rapping, Kurochuchi's annoyance, and Naruto's cheery attitude. They had managed to reach the forested foothills of the mountains by nightfall and had set up camp before the moon was out. Killer Bee said they could pass through the alpine-covered foothills and reach the ocean by noon tomorrow. The group of 4 had a hearty supper and went to bed early in order to move out when it was dawn. Unfortunately, Naruto had a hard time sleeping. His mind was fixated on too many things and he did not even know where to start in trying to organize it all. Killer Bee's raucous snoring was not helping, either. Finally, Naruto left his sleeping bag and went to find a quiet spot away from the campsite. A few hundred meters away from everyone, there was a cozy meadow that Naruto found to be quite satisfactory. The blonde Jinchuriki allowed himself to calm down and ponder all that was on his mind. Kurochuchi's honesty was the one that seemed to be prevailing amid the other worthy matters bouncing around his brain. She had finally poured out all that had been tormenting her for so long and Naruto was ever grateful for that. He could not deny his love for her. The way her eyes shined as she spoke about tough matters and the process she would undergo when Mitsu would surpass both their expectations, all made Naruto want to reach out to her. He wanted to run his fingers through her ebony locks and tell her it was all going to be alright. He loved her delicate words and saucy retorts. He yearned for her touch and her provoking thoughts to be whispered to him. When Naruto heard soft footsteps and a familiar breathing pattern, he also realized how much he loved Kurochuchi's impeccable timing. Naruto suddenly looked up and saw the dark-haired beauty leaning against an evergreen on the edge of the tiny meadow. She smiled sweetly and gracefully swept her feet over to him. "Hello, hero," she said as she plopped down in front of him. Naruto fixed his eyes fully on her. "You didn't even try to hide your movements. You're getting complacent, young lady." Kurochuchi pretended she did not hear him, instead she shivered. "Shit, it's cold out here." She rubbed her arms to warm up the smooth skin. "So, you couldn't sleep, hero?" "No, too much on my mind." "You?" Kurochuchi grinned and she put her tongue between her teeth for a moment. Her antics were not lessening his feelings for her, whatsoever. Not with Bee's snoring. Naruto was interested in the fact that Kurochuchi seemed to be in a livelier mood than usual. Maybe talking about her problems the day before had helped. Naruto was uncertain but thankful for that much. Her eyes rested on him and her mouth became more neutral. "So, what's on your mind then?" Naruto could not accurately answer that inquiry, so he dodged it with a half-truth. "What you said yesterday really resonated with me, Kurochuchi." Kurochuchi straightened her sitting posture and narrowed her eyes, trying to read him. "You've experienced your own pain, haven't you? A Jinchuriki's life has never been an easy one." Naruto shook his head and smiled softly. "Actually, I dealt with that stuff long ago. The loved ones who I have lost, on the other hand, is still hard to remember sometimes." Kurochuchi was made somber by that remark. She brushed aside her bangs and gave Naruto's words some thought. "I can imagine. You sure have formed a lot of relationships in your lifetime, huh?" Naruto smirked slightly. "All of this questioning from you is different, Kurochuchi. It's a little unlike you." Kurochuchi's brow lowered a bit. And you know all about me, don't you, hero? I'm just being fair is all. I poured my heart out yesterday, so today is your turn. Naruto rested his chin in one of his hands and smiled wryly. Your chivalry is much appreciated, my dear. Kurochuchi laughed. But seriously, you are a remarkable character for making so many friends. Naruto nodded. I just care about them and want what is best for them. So, you love them? Yes. Do you care about me? Naruto wondered if that was a trap, and if it was, what did that mean? Were her intentions to explore his feelings for her? He surmised it was better to use honesty when dealing with a trap. Of course, I do. Why? Naruto had not been expecting that question, especially the way she looked at him when she said it. It was a look that was begging for an answer, a much-needed answer. The light vibe had left and the serious one nestled itself between the two shinobi. Naruto tried to think on what would be the best response. He decided on the truth. Because you are there for me. I feel like you are not going anywhere. What would happen if I did? Naruto could tell that was not a jest, it was an honest question. I wouldn't be alright, let me say that. Because you care about me? Yes, because I see a dash. Naruto was suddenly cut off by Kurochuchi's arms. She had leaned forward and embraced him. The brisk evening warmed up as she held him. It was an amazing feeling, and while he was appreciative, he was also really startled. Kurochuchi put her mouth close to his ear and whispered, "Thank you, Naruto. I care about you too." All of a sudden, he felt something wet on his neck and he realized she was crying. Once Naruto felt the shock had died down, he slowly took his own arms and wrapped them around her. He brought her close and let her pour out what had been bottled up for so long. He had no idea what she was going through. It was wrong to ever compare his pain to hers, and he would not dare to attempt it. He just let her cry and held her. They both really needed the hug, after all. In that tender moment, Naruto felt her whispered words transcend his worries. They became a solid thing and fed his hungry soul. They were not all that he needed from her, but he realized it was not about what he took. Love was not about taking. It was about giving to the one that only deserved what was best for them. Naruto wondered if he was what was best for Kurochuchi. He knew he was a liar and an incorrigible fool, but he longed, more than absolutely anything, for that be true. That's it for part 4. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.